and thanks for dropping by on our YouTube channel. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That said, let's get to it. Which is basically the Chinese barbecue pork, or at least the vegan version of it. So that's just a hunk of tofu that is about 1/2 inch in thickness that had been marinating for 24 hours in the fridge in a sauce, which is this guy over here, and I'll walk through that in a second. And all I've simply done is taken these guys and I've sliced it on the diagonal so you can see the beautiful grain. So the idea is to create that illusion of what a roast barbecue pork looks like, which is usually a red skin or layer on the outer side, and cutting it on the diagonal helps give you that full aesthetic feel, but then also the sauce itself gives you the flavor of it. So without further ado, I'm going to pop him to the side and just start by showing you these guys. As mentioned, it's been marinating for 24 hours, 12 hours on each side. So at the 12-hour mark, I just kind of flip them over. They're 1/2 inch. So typically firm tofu comes in a chunk, and I usually cut it on the diagonal to roughly 1/2 inch. Basically, you want to make sure that at least half or more of the tofu is submerged, so that when you marinate it, it kind of doesn't leave a little gap in the middle, because that's not pretty. So what I've done here is put a bunch of different sauces, which I'm going to walk through now, and hopefully that'll give us a chance to give me a chance to show you what all that wonderful flavor is made up of. So to start with, we have 2 teaspoons of sesame oil. And so I'm using just regular sesame oil. You're more than welcome to use black sesame oil, which is a toasted sesame oil. It's just got more depth and flavor, which always helps when it comes to doing a marinade. So that's the sesame oil, 2 teaspoons of it's gone in here. The next thing I've got in there is dark soy sauce. Now, just to be clear, I'm talking about dark soy sauce as in not ketchup mayonnaise, which we will be using, but to a different measurement. Here we're using dark soy sauce. If you don't have dark soy sauce, you can use regular soy sauce. The idea here of using dark soy sauce, which is typically used in cooking, not so much marinades, but because I want to create that color on the outside of the tofu, I want to make sure I get as intense a color from the dark soy sauce. And that's why we're going with dark as opposed to light or regular. Again, use regular if you don't have dark, but if you do, that's going to definitely take it up a level. So we're doing 2 tablespoons of that. The next thing we're doing is 2 tablespoons of Chinese rice wine. Now, we talked about what rice wine or cooking wine during class, and there are a couple of different kinds. This one's the translucent one. And again, we want a clean flavor in the palate. We don't want Char Siew, which is the golden colored one, because it's got a lot of complex flavors. We just want the kick of cooking wine. And so that's why we use Mijou. So we're doing 2 tablespoons of that. The next thing we're doing is sugar. So it's really just 50 grams of sugar, or the equivalent in ounces. Really, that's going to just create that caramelized feel. So you can certainly use white sugar if you've got brown sugar or raw sugar. That'd be good too. But we are talking about granulated sugar to the 50 gram measurement, because anything more than that will become too sweet. So either white or raw or brown sugar, but granulated. 50 grams of that also went in here. The next thing that goes in there is 2 teaspoons of salt, and that's just to kind of give a little bit of flavor to the tofu. Tofu is quite plain. It's like a blank canvas, I say, because it will borrow the flavors of anything it hangs out with for a little while. And so that's where the salt's just going to intensify all those flavors that we're throwing in here, and that's going to just make it taste really wonderful. The next thing that goes in is Chinese 5-spice powder. So we're using a ground version. I typically have some on standby always, because it's such a wonderful flavor to use for roasting. And here it's typically a brown colored powder, and we're just using about 1/2 teaspoon. So not a lot, because this guy is chock filled with beautiful and wonderful flavors, but we don't want too much of it, just a smidge. So a 1/2 teaspoon of that goes in, and that's plenty. And the next thing we're going to use is hoisin sauce. Hoisin sauce is a plum sauce. Now, some folks may not necessarily have hoisin sauce on standby. Hoisin sauce is vegan by itself. You could also use oyster sauce. Now, obviously, if you want to keep it vegan, you'd need to use a vegan oyster sauce, but the two would be fine interchangeably if that's what you have in the fridge, so you don't have to go out and buy hoisin sauce. The next thing we're going to, and so it's a tablespoon of that. either vegan oyster sauce or hoisin sauce. The next thing we're going to do is 2 teaspoons of molasses. Now, molasses is not something everyone has in their pantry, and it's not typically an Asian ingredient, but you can use molasses if this is the molasses that you have. However, I'd encourage you to use what I referred to before, which is ketchup mayonnaise. So this is not dark soy sauce, although it is dark and has soy in it. It is the viscous sweet soy sauce that's traditionally from Indonesia and Malaysia. That works really well because it's got that sweetness, which is akin to molasses and also has some of the other flavors of soy that go really well with this dish. So if you have this guy, I would recommend using him, if not this, but one of the two would be absolutely required here to give that Char Siew flavor, that sweetness, in addition to the sugar that we've already added. The next thing we're going to add is going to be a couple of cloves of garlic. So we're talking about 3 cloves, 3 to 4, depending on if you like garlic. You can always add more. As you'll see here, I've already, it's already been marinating. You can see little bits of it sort of sitting at the top. And so that's just going to be floating inside the sauce around to flavor the marinade, but then also sitting on top of the tofu as well. And that stuff's beautiful. I'm starting to wipe it off because when I fry it, I will want to make sure that all that garlic has been removed. Otherwise, we're going to get burnt garlic in the pan as we fry it, and we don't want that. But we'll come back to that later. So again, 3 to 4 cloves of garlic should do the trick. The next thing we have is Maltose. Now, Maltose is something that I personally don't have in my pantry just because I don't use it quite a lot. So another option would be golden syrup. So you can use golden syrup in place of Maltose. Of course, if you have Maltose, go ahead and use 2 tablespoons of that. Golden syrup is a great alternative. Now, if you have honey, that's probably another alternative as well, but it is going to change the flavor of the dish because honey does have that floral fragrance to it, and that's not really what we're looking for here. So if you have honey and that's the only thing you've got, then go for that. Otherwise, I'd recommend golden syrup if you don't already have Maltose. The only other recommendation I'd make there, and I have this in the pantry all the time, is cooking caramel. So again, this is a very Chinese, Malaysian, Southeast Asian sort of a ingredient. It's used typically in stir fries and other forms of food preparation. It is very much like a syrup, and so it works really well as well. So in case you have that one at home, you can certainly use that, or golden syrup, or Maltose. So those are your 3 options there. The last thing that gets, last few things that get added is a tablespoon of boiling water. So we're talking about boiling hot water, and that's really to kind of just melt down the sugar and bring some of the other ingredients together just by way of heating it up a little bit. So 2 tablespoons of boiling water at the end, once you have all the other ingredients in there, to give it a good stir. And to that, you would add some red food coloring. Now, I'm using red food coloring because I don't have the traditional ingredient used for making Char Siew sauce, which is red fermented bean curd. And you can get that at Asian grocers. You'd use, I think, about 1.5 tablespoons of that, and you would reduce the hoisin. So say, for example, if you're putting in the 1 tablespoon of hoisin sauce, I'd drop that down to half, and I'd add 1 tablespoon of the fermented red bean curd. But if you don't have that, and you like red velvet cupcakes, which I do, and I always have red food coloring on standby, a good amount of it, probably anywhere between 4 to 8 drops, to really give that rich redness. And I've got like a darker red here, not like a chili red or a bright red. So I'm going for that deep color, which is why this guy is quite dark as well. The last thing to add would be white pepper. Now, this is my favorite secret ingredient. I talked about it during class as well. It's usually white peppercorns that you throw in a grinder and grind as much as you want. And I think more is more. You cannot have enough of it. That's one of the secret ingredients to all Asian, particularly Southeast Asian cooking. So now that we have that all in there, what you would do the day before is just put it in there. And again, as I mentioned, flip it on to the other side at the 12-hour mark, just to make sure each side of it gets evenly coated. That I'm going to lift these guys out and take out as much of the garlic, the minced garlic that's floating in the marinade, so that I don't have to dish out any burnt garlic pieces from the fry pan once I'm done, as I mentioned before. We will wait for that, that fry pan to come to high heat. We want that oil to be searing hot, and it's just going to be 3 minutes or so on each side, depending on how hot the oil is. You'll know it's done when the you'll know it's done when the layers of the tofu don't sizzle as much in the oil anymore. You'll know that it's ready, because that's all we're looking for. We're just looking to sear the tofu skin on the outside. Tofu, firm tofu in and of itself is typically ready to eat out of the packet. Doesn't really need to be cooked. We just want to give it that outer sort of finish with a crusty feel, and just give those flavors in the marinade an opportunity to get zinged up with some fry oil. So don't worry too much about the marinade, because we're not going to throw that away. That actually becomes a wonderful condiment to have on the side with the tofu. So unlike meat marinades, which you typically have to throw down the drain because it's not necessarily healthy or safe to eat, tofu is, again, already fully cooked, so you can absolutely go ahead and save that marinade to either throw on top of the sauce, or even use with anything else you want to cook with, like any kind of stir fry as well. Oil is nice and hot now. It's got bubbles all around it. And I'm going to go ahead and drop this guy in, and it's going to get really noisy because it is going to sear itself silly, which is what we want. So here we go. And I'm just going to pop both in at the same time. And you'll see that oil will start to get really red, because the red coloring is just going to kind of jump in there and have a bit of fun. So let that sort of set for a couple of minutes, and we'll know it's done and ready to be flipped over when that sizzling sensation starts to reduce. Dip some of this beautiful sauce in the meantime into this condiment bowl. Going onto the other side. What I might do while that sears is just grab some kitchen paper towels so that we can blot as much oil off of it once it's done frying. And let that sit there. Starting to diffuse a little, so let's see. I might do a flip now, going in underneath. And there we go. Oh, so can you see how it's just got that golden layer on the top? It's just kind of formed that crust, and it's quite pretty, but then also it's going to have an intensified flavor that goes with it. So a couple more minutes on this side, and I usually flip it one more time to the other side, just to make sure I've gotten all of it properly fried and evenly cooked. Yeah, and I don't mind moving it around a little bit, because it gives the oil a chance to just jump on top and make sure it's properly cooked all around. This guy is slightly thinner, so I'm going to put him over first. You can just see how beautiful it is all over. Let that sit there for a minute, and yep, that guy's good to go. Just quickly flip him over, and then we will be able to start to dish this out. Look at that. How beautiful does that look? Taking that one out. I'm going to move him up right there. And let that drip as much as possible. Turn that heat off. And voila, that. And what we're going to do now is just kind of fold it over to make sure it's nicely. It's interesting because it's coming out of hot oil, but it's not typically hot to the touch. Not at least if you have it with at least 3-ply toilet. Sorry, 3-ply kitchen paper. Not toilet. I'm just going at it on both sides. And we're going to do that again. And it's completely cool to the touch now. Just squeezing out as much oil, and some coloring will come out, and I wouldn't worry too much about that, but ultimately we just want to make sure that we've gotten all that lovely oil off. So I'm just going to go around the edges now. And yeah, it's pretty blotted, if there was such a term. All right, and we are ready to slice. So we're just going to, as I mentioned at the beginning, slice in the diagonal. I'm going to move him to the side. Putting him to the side so you can see me slice first. I'm going to go with the bigger guy. And I always go on the diagonal because it just gives that beautiful skin the opportunity to jump out and be able to kind of get displayed on the length. So the longest possible piece there. And I am using a serrated knife because that layer on the outside does create quite a bit of a crust. I'm just going to quickly show you that while I slice up the rest. But can you guys see how pretty that looks? It's got some color that's starting to fade into the center. Again, very similar to how Char Siew, traditional Char Siew would look. And it smells fantastic. It smells like the meat dish because the sauce is exactly the same. So it's not very different. The only thing that probably is slightly different is the texture of the tofu. It's not going to be the same as pork, of course, but at least flavor-wise and aesthetically, it looks pretty good. And so there we go. I'm going to plate this up, and we are going to be able to have this wonderful dish, again, with your Singapore noodles, and if not, any other meal you might want to have. With faux pork, or at least the flavors of what is traditionally Chinese barbecue pork. There you have it, with the sauce to go on the side. And there it is. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more culinary content coming your way.